today's show, I'm receiving Chad Frischmann, one of the co-creators of Project Drawdown and founder of Regenerative Intelligence. We talk about Project Drawdown's historical book and insights from those enormous research and studies, Chad's new role to continue spreading the word in a different way, how Chad deals with the lack of progress, eco-anxiety, and the looming risk rising. We even touch on geoengineering, the spiritual journey, yin and yang, and finding balance to sustain the long personal journey to driving positive impact. This is a packed episode. Enjoy it. Chad, welcome to Climate Insiders.
Hi, Johan. It's great to be here.
To get things started, how would your best friend finish the sentence? Chad Frischmann is
awesome. Chad Frischmann. You know, a lot of my best friends say, Chad is rad. And I'm old enough to know what rad actually means.
So what does rad means to you from a climate perspective and all the cool things that you...
Well, I think it goes beyond just being cool, right? I mean, being cool is fair enough, but being rad is like a level up. It's like being cool, but also authentic with integrity, empathy, and compassion. That is a rad guy.
It's funny because people that sort of don't know you personally would go check you out on TED or YouTube, stuff like that. And you don't sound a rad guy, meaning more, controlled, and you own your topic, but you don't show that.
I appreciate that, Johan. I do, because it's funny. You're not the first person to say this. I joined this amazing community called Future Horizon, which is a shout out to that great community there. And when I was talking to the founders, they said, "Well, we were a little intimidated after hearing your talks about climate science and solutions, but then we got to know you and we realized you're pretty rad."
If there's any takeaway from this interview, that's it. You got it. You guys can just dial down. All right. So we're going to start, this is going to be a wide-ranging conversation. Obviously, you had a really long hat, Project Drawdown. You have a new role now at Regenerative Intelligence. You're also launching a new education program. So there's all those kind of things in the program. But first, I want to preface, and I want to say that, you probably hear this all the time, but I'm very appreciative of all the Project Drawdown's work, that you've done all those years. You publish a lot of instrumental material that helps most VCs in the space conduct their own work. When we do an impact assessment and we're trying to assess which companies we should invest in, we refer to that kind of monster work that Project Drawdown has put together. So a big thank you on behalf of the community.
Oh, well, thank you. And I really do also appreciate that. I do hear that a lot, and it always makes me really happy to hear, because honestly, when we launched Drawdown, we founded it with Paul Hawken, Amanda Ravenhill, myself, we didn't think anyone was going to really pay attention. We didn't think it was going to be that exciting. A list of solutions. We almost were like, duh, why doesn't this even exist already in the world? Obviously. And we saw some stuff that was out there, but it wasn't substantiated by real science, real data. It wasn't really bringing together the vast brilliance of humanity together in one spot, one place. And that's what we set out to do. And amazingly, after 3-4 years of really heads down doing that work and that research, getting that data together, the product is Drawdown, the book. And that's really influenced so many folks. And so it was really a joy to be there for 8 years, being, it was my baby, as one of the creators there. And so it really was wonderful to see it have such influence out into the world.
It definitely did.
Yeah.
Well, now we're years after the sort of the first publication of it. You had a sort of reprint, or, in 2020. Is Drawdown still possible by 2050? This is probably the question that you get asked all the time, but given how things are trending, we haven't even picked in the increase of annual emissions. The reversing still seems so far away. Do you still believe in it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, not only did we, upgrade, if you will, the report, the book in 2020, but then again in 2022, just before I left, we had a whole new range of solutions. And the reality is, as you often hear in the media, who kind of filters a lot of the science, you hear that the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target recommended by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to be sort of the target humanity needs to set to avoid some of the worst case scenarios and tipping points in our Earth systems. You hear often, particularly recently, that that's impossible. We're going to somehow never be able to achieve it. And the reality is, it is absolutely achievable. But we have to understand what the science is actually telling us. It is telling us that by 2100, a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target is required. But every single model that's produced, or everyone most of them that I see, always show an overshoot and then goes back down again. What I mean by that is drawdown. That is that point of when you start to reverse global warming and go back down to a 1.5. And every 1.5 scenario has it and has had it since 2014. So I want to stress that point. It is possible. The science is still saying it's possible. And I think what it really takes is a shift in our political will and the will of businesses and institutions to make these transformations and not get caught up with, the incremental change and get caught up with, pessimism that it's not going to happen. Really, we need to move forward a lot faster. Yes, but it is possible.
All right. Well, so that's good news, and I'm gonna try to challenge that a little bit because from what I've seen, right, in sort of my 7 years in the climate space is just a reverse correlation between all the conferences and what has been announced and those government pledges and all that stuff, and the actual emissions continuing climbing up at even an accelerating pace. So, how do you keep hope when you see all this work that sort of the silent army gets, but that the guys at the top at the head of governments or corporates don't seem to fully abide by?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think the key for me is understanding being grounded in reality. And when we think about the reality of our Earth systems, we are not going to get to 100% renewable energy by 2030. It's not going to happen. We're not going to get to 100% regenerative agriculture globally by 2030, 2040, maybe even not even 2050. That shouldn't stop us from really be implementing these solutions at any scale that we can. And so yes, governments aren't achieving their pledges, which are already well below what they really need to be doing. And we see that. And we're already laggards in that. We're seeing that in business. We're seeing that across the board. So what I want to ground myself in the reality is this. I am optimistic because I actually believe if we can get not 100%, but 30%, it's just a random number I'm picking at the top of my brain here, but if we get 30% of the whole system to be a regenerative model, to be implementing solutions, I think that by 2030 or so on, I think that we can actually pivot at that point and have enough of the system operating in a regenerative way that we can dramatically increase and accelerate the rate in which we are making that transition. So my goal is actually, how do I get the system to be about 30% of the whole? Imagine the whole system being a market. If I can get about 30% of that regenerative, I think we can actually get through this and accelerate to the transition when it comes, because it will be needed. Now, people know this, Jan. From me, they think of me as the eternal optimist, the positive guy in climate, and I am. But the reality is that already built into the system are catastrophic losses, right? Even if we stopped emissions today, we still will be experiencing a response of Earth systems to what's already up there. And that's going to happen. I don't know when. It could be 5 years from now. It could be 7 years from now. It could be less. And when that happens, it's going to be such a trauma. And I don't want to scare people in this. This is not doom and gloom, but it's going to be such a trauma that we can't continue to do business as usual. It just simply won't be possible. We're going to have catastrophic losses of scales that we cannot ignore, no matter where we are in the world. A dear colleague, Kim Stanley Robinson, wrote Ministry of the Future. That is not a crazy scenario. That's actually probably going to happen. So we have to brace ourselves to that reality of what's already into the system. But if we have 30% of that system by that time operating in a regenerative way, then when we're forced to make that shift because of that trauma that we're actually experiencing and built into the system, enough of the system is there that capital can flow, that business can become operable all over the world, and it's already enough of the system to strengthen and then accelerate the implementation of solutions. And that's what actually makes me optimistic. I know it sounds maybe like doom and gloom, but I think it's grounded in reality, allows me to actually be optimistic and have determination to implement, to change the way we're operating today to as much as I can before that happens.
right? So that's kind of plan B, right? Plan A is already out of the window. Plan B is 30%. Plan C, it seems to me, and there's a lot of experts that seem to converge in that reality, is we might get to 5%, but the plan for rapid transformation will be on the table. So that when the shit hits the fan, when catastrophes start piling up, COVID scale, the governments won't have the choice, right? The people will want it. The circumstances will push everything, and we were going to be go all in. Probably very late, but still gonna swing and do rapid swings in that positive direction. Another question that I have is kind of personal interest is: do you feel closer to the venture world, the venture capital world, or the political world? Because those are kind of the two sides of the spectrum that are trying to implement the Project Drawdown and everything that you put together in the real life.
Oh, that's a very good question. When I think about change, I often have said this over the years, we often think about top-down approaches to this, and that's often seen as, policy and government, and like government top-down regulation, regulatory mechanisms, financial mechanisms that come from government, policies, laws, etc. Very important. There's no question about that. Or bottom up, that is somehow the role of every individual to transform the way we do business. And I often say yes, there is a role for bottom up. There's a role for everybody to take to change and to opt to be a part of the solution that we want to achieve, and it's top down as well. We need that, but most importantly, our institutions, the institutional change. And I call that the middle out, right? And this is business, the financial institutions, educational institutions, cultural institutions. That has to change because that's where actually most emissions are happening. Government's not producing a ton of emissions itself, to be honest. I mean, obviously, it's part of the market and contributing to it. And the military is a huge, emitter. But bottom up, again, individuals, by and large, you and I, aren't really producing a lot of emissions ourselves. Maybe the choices we make, but our choices are limited by what the institutions provide us. So take this as just an example. Imagine the entire system, which I always like to do. I like to imagine everything like together. Imagine it like a grocery store, right? And a consumer goes into that grocery store. If 90% of what's on the shelf is contributing to the problem, 10% is contributing to the solution. And let's be honest, of that 10%, the vast majority, 8%, is actually being produced by the same corporations and companies that are producing the problems on those shelves, called greenwashing. And 2% or 3% are actual real solutions. Is it the consumer's fault for not being able to find under the clever marketing that prevents them from finding it, or being able to afford those solutions? No. I mean, the reality is, when you really think about it, it's not. Consumer choice is an illusion. We don't have a tremendous amount of consumer choice when the vast majority of what's on the shelves in that grocery store, which is the principal like a storefront, or the principal like a way we operate as consumers, is all part of the problem. So at the end of the day, producers produce emissions, and that's what I think really the transformation has to happen, is from businesses, and then the investors that are funding and providing capital to those businesses have to, without fail, say impact number one, return on investment number two, and that, or redefine what return on investment even means to incorporate impact in addition to profitability. So businesses have to change 100% because they are the ones actually producing emissions and putting those emissions, if you will, on the shelf. And that's emissions, biodiversity loss, human health problems, destruction of our oceans. All of that is coming not from consumers choosing that. Consumers don't want that. They're just choosing what's on the shelf. And so we need more things on the shelf that are part of the solution. So I say, businesses, most important. We need to transform that, and we need investors in the financial market and institutions to be pouring capital into solutions, not vice versa.
Right. And another debate that comes up a lot is: what is the actual role of innovation versus existing technology and policy making? So really taking from using your analogy, what's off the shelf, from spending enormous budgets to innovate and coming up with new products.
Yeah, one of my favorite topics on, really, it is, because again, I mean, harkening back to the drawdown world, the whole premise of what we did when we created that. And I really designed that whole solutions framework. So I chose what solutions were on that list and what solutions were not, which technologies and prices were not on this list. So I made those decisions. And what I really wanted to focus on were existing technologies and practices, real
Mhm.
working technologies that we know based on science and data are working, that are already being implemented, that are scalable, et cetera, et cetera. And that is the entire premise of Drawdown. But we also had coming attractions in that book, if you remember, in the old days. The new crew at Project Drawdown is not you were thinking so much about coming attractions, but in that book we really profiled 20 coming attractions. Those are innovations, technologies on the pipeline waiting to be introduced into that system. And I want to highlight that because I think there are two things to say about innovation. One, we need to be innovating the hell out of what already exists. So instead of inventing some brand new silver bullet technology, which is not going to come along, and when it comes into the system, it's not going to suddenly transform everything. It's just not going to happen. Not a single silver bullet technology that's touted as silver bullet that I have seen even comes close to being a real silver bullet. It doesn't exist. But if we look at solar panels, we need to make them so much more efficient and resource productive. So we're using less and less and less materials to produce more and more and more generation. So, allowing greater capacity for installations of solar with increased generation, but much, much less resources that are used so that we can actually have that system. It's just an example. And that's across the board. We need to be innovating the hell about with the solutions and technologies that already exist and make them more efficient, more resource productive, more economically viable and scalable today. And don't lose sight of those new technologies that come along that when entering into that system of solutions are actually going to accelerate us that much faster. That's how we're actually going to get even more to that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target sooner, is when those innovations come into the system alongside the innovations of existing technologies.
All right. So, what about you? Probably referring to carbon capture, something that can extract, right, and get us closer to the actual initial projections. What about geoengineering in now? Is it
Ooh.
still taboo in your view of the world, or when are we going to pass and this is going to jump into the mainstream?
I think I'm deeply concerned about geoengineering. And we can talk a lot about direct air capture, carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and use. This is a different thing, enhanced weathering, etc. But geoengineering is a real concern of mine. There's too many unknowns about the longer term impacts of any geoengineering technology that I've come across. And my biggest concern, and I almost am reluctant to say this online, even though it's been said by many and it's been said by me in the past, but like I just don't like to keep reiterating it. But anyone can do it; they're cheap. I am really concerned about geo engineering solutions because some crazy or potentially thoughtful, whatever you want to call it, billionaire can, you know, launch this, can implement a solution overnight without any regulation, without it. And it's really concerning to me that these are so easily deployable and
Hmm.
and so cheap that just about anybody can do it. So there's so much more research that needs to be done about the implications of any type of geoengineering. And yeah, I kind of think, leave it to the academics and the researchers in universities and laboratories under really confined conditions to experiment. And in some true doomsday scenario, and it's a lifeboat mechanism, okay, like let's leave that to a scenario that's the worst case scenario imaginable. And until then, don't even put it on the table. And my concern is that some rich billionaire or some small state country with
Hmm.
that's I hesitate to say rogue state, but you know what I mean. That will just act on something and cause great devastation to our
Protect their
planet.
own interest.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Ministry for the Future. We are not far from that scenario where a wet bulb 35 event wiping out millions of people in a highly densely populated area like Nigeria, like India, Bangladesh, would trigger this kind of event, right? The collapse of the global
Mm-hmm.
order, and then the regionalization of decisions, and then a country like India deciding to spread aerosols in the air to cool down regionally the temperatures. And then geoengineering can take so many shapes and forms, right? Pumping water back on the Arctic so that you regenerate the melting poles, etc., etc. So, in your opinion, this is still taboo. We should not even mention that. Still stay at the mitigation side of the spectrum using this kind of technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think mitigation and adaptation solutions, and oftentimes they're the same thing. You know, we often want to dichotomize this into one area or the other, but a really good mitigation solution is actually part of it adaptation because it allows us to adapt to those changes in the environment.
Yeah.
And many kinds of shocks to our economic and social and environmental systems. So a good mitigation strategies like renewable energy system, you know, regenerative built environment, regenerative agriculture, all of these things are actually adaptation as well as mitigation solutions. Um, but yes, the pumping of water on the Arctic, yeah, that I think still needs more thoughtful approach to it. But you know, there are some geoengineering that I'm kind of more inclined to like maybe this would be more interesting. I have to see more about the science. I have to see where it's
Mhm.
going. But there's, as you said, there's many different kinds, and so it needs to be highly regulated, controlled, and not in the hands of business investors or government, but funded by international bodies and having teams of scientists in charge of this. International cooperation needs to be at the center of any sort of geoengineering solution.
Now let's come back to today to Rad Chad or Chad Rad. Why did Chad Rad decide to leave such a beautiful organization that he contributed to growing? Project Drawdown. You've probably spoken about this, but at the personal level, kind of the intimate level, I wanted to understand that decision. And do you think in your life mission, where you want to dedicate probably the rest of your life to that mission, why do you think your role had to change?
Oh, well, a lot of people ask me, why did you leave your baby? I mean, it was your baby for
Mhm.
so long. And often say, well, I nurtured that baby till it was on its own 2 feet and let it carry on. And I also happen to give birth to twins. And so I'm not raising 3 kids at once. One of them's got to be out of the house. And I got 2 kids now. Yeah. We launched 2 new organizations. And I think we launched those organizations because we really saw the core original vision of Drawdown was really what is the system of solutions that can stop and reverse global warming, but at the same time, if we do those solutions right, can be a catalyst to create a regenerative economy. So Paul, Amanda, myself, we're actually come not necessarily as we're not. None of us are atmospheric physicists. None of us are, you know, you know, uh, true hardcore climate scientists like Michael Mann or Catherine Hayhoe or something like this. We actually come from a very different space. Paul is an entrepreneur, right, and an author, and Amanda is a coalition builder and a systems thinker. And I actually came from a space of sustainable development, environmental conservation, and local and indigenous people's rights and well-being. And these are the frontline issues, of course, to the changing climate, and that's where the idea to find that system of solutions for climate came from. But it's really, we got together with this audacious idea: what if we could solve climate change and at the same time try to solve everything else, right? How do we solve our sustainable development goals? How do we preserve and protect our environment and our biodiversity? And how do we actually create a regenerative social and economic structure and system that benefits humanity and the planet? If we can do that, that was the real goal of Drawdown in the early days. And so I felt that over the 8 years of leading Drawdown, we really hyper focused on the climate piece. And even though all of my talks reference regenerative economies and regenerative thinking, and one of the classic lines I still say to this day, we want these solutions whether or not global warming was even a problem,
Mhm.
right? And so that gave birth to Regen Intel. And the twins, actually. Global Solutions Alliance is our nonprofit organization. And then Regen Intel, or Regenerative Intelligence, which is our public benefit partnership. And so that gave birth to these two organizations. And their mission, essentially, of these two organizations is to help accelerate our transition to a regenerative economy by guiding humanity to become a planet positive species, which is frankly a little bit more audacious and ambitious than even solving global warming, because it's part of it. So yeah, that led us to like leave Drawdown after 8 years in a good position to continue walking its course, and then give birth to these two new things, which we're incredibly excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are launching soon a education program. So part of spreading ideas is to train, right? Educate, to transmit, to make sure that you leave people with the first steps so they can carry on. Can you tell us more about this?
Oh yeah. So our core thesis here with Regen Intel is, how do we equip people and organizations with the right tools to solve for their climate targets, their sustainability goals, but embed that with regenerative principles so that we can upskill, if you will, organizations and individuals to be regenerative leaders of the future economy today. So how can we get more people thinking about, you remember I mentioned that 20-30% of the system are regenerative. How do we get that 20? How do you really equip them with the tools to do that? And then the future economy, which is, I think, inevitable. Eventually humanity is going to create a regenerative economy. But how do we get more and more leaders and organizations today to be opting into that those principles, but also solving their climate targets and sustainability goals?
Can I challenge that? Why would it be inevitable? Isn't there a scenario where a status quo perdures until the end of time, until the collapse of our civilization?
Oh, of course, there's a scenario. Oh, yeah. Okay. Fair enough. If inevitable in the sense of, if we actually want to ensure that the systems that we're currently operating and the benefits that we are experiencing as a species continue, then we have to create a regenerative economy. If we are happy with a collapse of our economic system and massive disruption and population loss, and we're seeing a dramatic, even far fewer zones of continued of the continued operation of our system today. It's going to shrink down, right? And the world of the future, if we don't create this, if we don't solve climate change, if we don't solve the biodiversity collapse, that is actually even more threatening to our way of life than climate change, and these are two things inextricably intertwined, where our way of life is going to be entirely different, and it's not going to be good for billions of people. It's not going to be that.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to have billions of people not only survive, but live productive, happy, joyful lives, we need to create a regenerative economy. And so that's why I say it's inevitable. And maybe that's why I'm an optimist, because I actually believe and want to see every human on this planet to have their well-being fulfilled in the most joyful way, in connection and concert with nature. So that's what it means to be planet positive. And that to me is like, we need to be there. Otherwise, we're talking about a dystopian future, which I don't think anyone, even the people who are the power mongers of our current system, they don't actually want that for that future. So I think it actually is inevitable that humanity will evolve into that regenerative economy. 2100 beyond, that's the trajectory we're on now. But
Right.
My life's ambition is to fast forward that as much as possible, so that we get there sooner.
And you consider yourself a mission-derived person as opposed to being a mission-driven one. So what does that mean to you?
Oh, yes. Thank you for asking that, Johan. I don't often get asked this very much, so I really appreciate it. So when I think about a mission-driven person, this is someone in my mind who is like in a car, right, on a road, and they're in control of their vehicle and they're going at all costs down the highway or whatever. And it's a much like, to be mission driven is, I'm going to achieve that goal. I'm going to get to that point no matter what the cost. That's the one trajectory. A mission derived person, this is why I associate myself in this way, is whatever I do, however I operate in the world, whatever organization I launch or work for, at whatever scale, it's going to serve the mission. The mission is operating within me. I come from the mission. I'm not driving it. I'm not putting my blinders on and looking, okay, this is the way I'm going to go. I'm going to see like the zone of opportunity and flow with the system, flow with how life is coming to me, and know that what I do is going to serve that mission because I am derived from it. And it's a little bit of a, it's like a fundamental shift, I think, in, it's maybe a subtle shift, but it is a fundamental shift in how you think about how we operate in the world. And the people around us, I think, when you're mission derived, you tend to be more collaborative. You tend to work together more with people. You're not you're less focused on yourself succeeding and you're more focused on the group or the community succeeding, because that's what that's about. It's about the mission succeeding, not you being driven to achieve your, being the one to achieve the mission. It's the mission itself. And so that really carries through in all of the work that I do. And it really centers me a lot. It allows me to like feel very happy with life, because I know that however things happen, whatever comes my way, and whoever I meet, I'm going to approach that with that, mission derived vantage point and feeling, and it's going to make, I'm going to know what comes from that is going to serve the mission in the right way. I'm not going to do at all costs say like I have to be the one to do this. I don't need to be a hero. I don't want to be a hero. I'd rather be one of many leaders, and I think that that comes from being mission derived.
So it's funny because I've gone through a bit of a journey on my own, trying to understand where that mission comes from, right? That drive, the gut feeling, sort of just embedded in my DNA. It feels like at times, and I feel I need to carry that responsibility. Uh, do you feel the same way? And how do you? So where does that come from? And it
Mm.
seems like you're also evolving in your own way. So I often look at the Asian or the Oriental way of breaking down the yin and the yang forces. The yang is what drives you, the ambition, the idea of you, I'm going to be very active in my quest to be impactful. And the yin is kind of the more grounding force, letting the forces of universe kind of take care of everything around you. Are you also going from yang to yin and kind of accepting that the faith of the world, or are you still very much yang driven?
Oh, yeah. No, I think I'm very much in the flow of what the world brings to me. I think, when we talk about ambition, again, oftentimes I think in our culture we associate ambition with ego, and it's so embedded with our own egotistical drive. And we all have ego, and there's a healthy amount of ego that's good. Um, but I also think like culturally we assume that to be ambitious and to be successful, you have to be that strong hyper ego and have to be so mission driven. And I actually think the most powerful and influential and inspiring people that I have been blessed to encounter in the world, um, it's they're ambitious because the mission they serve, the mission they're derived from, is so ambitious. It's so audacious that whatever they're doing in service of that mission is going to be really ambitious, and it does fuel them. But it's that ego, the yin that's coming in there is like cooling down that ego part of it and saying you are actually serving a greater purpose. And when you serve that greater purpose, you bring a lot more power into it. That's a healthy amount of power and ambition that comes from the vision that you are inspired to create, inspired to nurture, inspired to be part of. And so yeah, I think it's a definitely. I go into that flow all the time. But again, as you see from a lot of my talks you've mentioned earlier, like I'll talk science with you, I'll talk data with you, no problem. Let's go. Let's the hardcore numbers. And a lot of people also think
Yeah.
if you get too into the yin and yang thing and the flow, you become sort of this hippie. And I'm kind of woo woo too. I mean, I like my crystals, and I also like my data and my science. So I like accept everyone.
So you have multiple weapons, right? Weapons of choice. So I also want to kind of, at the intimate personal level, you probably have people around you that are still stuck in the matrix. It's kind of what I describe it. People that just do not understand the new circumstances that surround us and the threat that's coming, right? So they still want to get a loan, sorry, a mortgage for a 20 or 30-year kind of house. They just want to get a job. They're still kind of stuck in the material requirements. And how do you try to convince those people that there's a new reality, that they should also be purpose driven? Or you kind of let them be stuck in their own reality? Are you sort of a person that will try to advocate and change people, or No, you're looking too much at the macro level.
No, well, oh, that's a super good question. Yeah, no, here's a little anecdote. Personal, very personal one. Over the years, I've had some really loving, wonderful partners, and none of them have been in this space. None of them have been working in climate or sustainability, and for somehow I find myself in this loving relationship with these wonderful humans. Currently, now, for example, my partner's a psychiatrist, and he doesn't know much about sustainability and climate. And I talk to him about what I do, and I kind of guide and steer our lifestyle to ensure that it is sustainable, and that we are living a life of purpose and solutions in our life. But I don't try to force the issue on him or previous partners, for example. And the reason I'm bringing up this kind of a personal context is because I think that kind of illustrates how I operate in the world. How can I show what is possible without blaming, shaming, convincing, arguing, trying to say you have to change because you're the problem. No, no, no. I'd rather show what is possible, what I can do in the world, and what people like me can do in the world, and show that as a valuable way to be. But I never want to shame. I never want to blame. I never want to try to convince. And I think when your question is about do you try to change individuals' behavior, I think there are ways to influence others. I want to change institutions. I want to change those individuals who have the power over those institutions to shift those levers. Those are the people I want to focus on. And yes, I will focus on them. I will definitely want to focus on them rather than just the macro. But focus on the people who have the power to change
Hmm.
and refuse to. They're the ones who should be, really hyper focused on, not sort of just, everybody needs to change. I really want to make sure that we hone in on that point. And there's some been really great campaigns that I think have been coming out that are a little bit controversial. Future Earth, for example, has put out a campaign pointing fingers at the individual, the people behind oil and gas companies, and saying these are the actual people who are making the decisions. And I support that, actually. It took me a long time to
Don't
get
you?
there. But yeah.
Can I challenge that a little bit? Because in my view, it's a bit like the political system. The people in power will never adopt a reform or change the system when it's not popular, right? They're not going to push something that is non-popular. That's not a way to gain votes. Votes. So in a way, it almost needs to rise to a level of popularity. Or the people that are in their ranch playing golf, they need to triangulate information from their buddies
Mhm.
that it is time to change, right? It is time to operate corporates in a different way. That alternative forms of growth is better. I don't think the CEO of Shell will just be influenced in his own way when his circle, the 5 people that he spends the most time with, do not think at all in the ecological way. So in a way, it comes hand in hand. You need to force both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, yeah, you're not wrong. No, no, no. And I don't think that's actually a challenge, to be honest. I think that's, I would totally reinforce that. I think advocacy is incredibly important. I think activism is incredibly important. I think getting people in communities to go onto the streets and to call their politicians and to force as much as they can. Sure, 100%. Absolutely. And this is actually why I'm referring to that Future Earth campaign. I think they popularizing this by getting it out on the social media to say, actually, let's focus on getting the popular. And now, granted, this is not necessarily like the most positive kumbaya kind of way to do it. It's kind of really pointing fingers, but it's a way to get more people to say look, we keep being told by these institutions that we all have to change and we all
Mhm.
can't change. It's too hard because, again, grocery scenario, 90% of what's on the shelf is not there. So it's part of the problem. So it's hard for us to change, and it's our fault. But this is also a ploy of the oil and gas company. This is part of their propaganda campaign to say, oh, it's all about your individual footprint. Let's focus. BP famously always talking about individual footprints. The reality is BP needs to change. Not all of these people need to change. And so that
Right.
that sort of distortion of where responsibility really is lands, I think is part of the problem. Yes, get more and more people out there to popularize the will to do this. But I think at the end of the day, we need to change the leadership in these corporations and companies that continue to do this, and help guide and steward. I mean, that's what the role of Regen Intel. I mean, we have our education stuff that we just launched, but we also have our Regen Intel transformation. It's a global advisory. We work directly, and we are wanting to increasingly work more and more with organizations and corporations to say, hey, let's meet you where you're at. We get where you're going, where you're at the right now. How do we help you achieve your climate targets? How do we help you achieve your sustainability goals? And embed that with regenerative principles so you could lead the pack, so you could lead the way, right? And so we want to target organizations that are willing and wanting to make change, and we help to guide you through it, right? Because part of the problem I think a lot in this space is we assume, well, like the drawdown, we assume we just put out a book and do a bunch of talks and update these solutions, and then everyone's just going to adopt them. The reality is it's fine to say what are the solutions and what is possible, but at the end of the day, we got to help people and organizations and those leaders say, how do you actually do it? And that's still not there, and that's what Regen Intel is kind of all about.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thanks so much for this role. And since we kind of touched on personal matters, the last question I would have for you is, how do you deal with eco anxiety? I mean, this is also something where I agree with you. Just as it's a preface to this question is, we need to impact those people that are in control of corporates. We also need to nurture the people like you that are at the forefront of this fight that might lose the fuel because they've been doing this for too long, and eco anxiety is one of them. I don't know if you have any kind of tricks there.
Well, that's a great question. I do a lot of meditation and yoga, and I like to surround myself with really loving humans and community. And I think what allows me to deal with eco anxiety, it's a real thing that we who have been in this business for a long time feel every day, and probably almost every young person to some extent feels every day because it's their future that they know is in jeopardy. Um, and so I think, it's hard, but I think it's that sense of coming together, really. It's collaboration. That's the only way we can deal with this type of anxiety when we are working on such ambitious, audacious things, mission-derived things, and there's not a lot of reward because we don't. Again, because we're not washed with money coming in to support us, and we're not these like the rich, wealthy green groups that some of the companies or corporations or the right wing side of the equation like to say, oh, it's all just some kind of ploy to make more people wealthier. We're not actually, so part of what I'm kind of babbling here a little bit, so sorry to close with this way, but you'll cut all this out in the end of it.
No worries.
The key thing is, I think the point I want to make is we struggle a lot in this space, and there's burnout, there's anxiety, we're not compensated enough, we are considered to be on the fringe, and we're niche. I mean, we're still niche in this world. We're a tiny percentage of the voices that are out there that are trying, and we've been doing it for a long time. And so it's really hard. And the only thing that actually I think we can do is take time for self-care, meditation, yoga, walking, being in nature, all of these things that fuel me. I'm also on a shamanic journey myself. So I go down to Ecuador with a wonderful shaman, indigenous person, indigenous leader called Kurakindi, one of the great indigenous leaders, I think, in the world. And he's training me to be a shaman, and part of that process,
Awesome.
it's part of that is like how you take care of yourself and how you look to your inner self and work on your inner self in collaboration and community with those around you. So yeah, I think that's kind of the way to deal with it. Yeah, as best you can.
It's funny because it goes back to the concept of yin and yang, where we are trained by our education system to be yang, 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 right? To keep pushing, 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 especially in the work environment. And at some point, you just can't anymore, right? So you need to take care of yourself. And the yin, it very much binds this idea of a community, which is very abstract and esoteric. It took me a while to understand, but it is really the process is even more important than the outcome. So when it comes to the climate fight, the outcome will be there regardless. We are not in control. It's an externality at this point. But the process of bonding with people that are value aligned, that are really driven, and that are beautiful, amazing people, it is so rewarding on a daily basis. And so I invite everyone to join communities. I mean, this is what we're trying to build, right? And so I support you on joining. This is awesome.
Thank you,
Maybe
Johan.
we can do part two.
Arm in arm, linking arms for sure.
Yes. Next episode, you can tell us all about the shaman pursuits. And
Absolutely.
so thank you so much, Chad. Awesome to have you here. Super insightful to follow your journey.
Thank you, Johan. It's a pleasure to be here, and to everyone listening. Yeah, reach out to Regen Intel and see how you can be part of our community.
Let's merge communities and support each other.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.